HTML forms are used to collect user input, and those are usually sent to the server for processing, or if you talk in the terms of back end, front end. So usually the inputs are sent to the back end for some sort of processing and returning back something maybe. So form element is used to create HTML form element. So we have this form and inside that a couple of them. So let's quickly explore it. So here you see you have a form. This first name comes from this label. Then we have this input of type text, another label, another input, and finally input of type submit, and with the value submit. Okay. So for actions, you see we have a certain URL here. So if you click the submit button, the form data will be sent to a page called actionpage.php. Okay. Don't worry about this at the moment. So form, and inside that we have form elements. The form element is a container for different types of input, such as text fields, checkbox, radio buttons, submit buttons, and there are just a few of them. Okay, so don't need to worry about it. We'll quickly cover all of them. The input element is the most used form element, and input element can be displayed in many ways depending on the type attributes. So it can be of type text, radio, checkbox, submit, or a button. Okay. Text fields, we do type equals to text, for example, for the name and the last name. Another thing, so here this input is a separate element, label is a separate element, but somehow a connection is established between label and the input. And this is usually done using for attribute in the label. So input has an ID of fname, okay, and label has the for of fname. So this label is for this input. Okay, what is the proof? So if we go here, if I click first name, see the focus automatically goes to John. If I click last name, it automatically goes to Doe. Now let me do some mischief. So I'll disrupt the for name for this label, and the first name I link it to the last name. Okay. Now see what happens if I click the first name. The focus goes here, right? Because we have created a programmatic relationship between this input and this label. So we use for and the ID of the input to create this relationship. And so yeah, they have given how this would look in the browser. Label element. So label are very important, both for the users who directly use the forms and users who use assistive technologies such as screen readers. The label tag defines label for many form elements. The label element is useful for screen reader users because screen readers will read out loud the label when the user focuses on the input element. And the label element also help users who have difficulty on clicking very small regions such as radio buttons, checkboxes. They can simply click on the label or the text and it toggles the radio or the checkboxes. Okay. And as we have already seen, the for attribute of the label should be equal to the ID of the input to bind them together, to create a programmatic relationship between them. Input type can be radio. Okay, so for example, I'll just open it. So here we see we have 3 radio buttons. So here input type is equal to radio. Then we have a label, and with label again we have another input type equals to radio. then again another label, then input type radio, and another label. So we have radio label, radio label. Their types are radio. ID is used in the label for 4. And their name is Fav language for all 3 of these. And they have a value. Okay. What if I change name of one of these, like Fav language something? So then you will see that this is a separate group, right? These two are separate groups and this is a separate group. This group is formed by the same name. Okay. So we have type, radio, ID for creating a relationship between label. Then we have a name to form a group, and then we have a value. This is radio. Do practice it a little bit. We have checkboxes. Okay. Very similar to them, but we can select multiple, and it's not very important to have this. Submit button defines a button for submitting the form data to the form handler. Okay. The form handler is typically a file on the server with a script for processing the input data, and the form handler is specified in the form action attribute. So this form has this action attribute. So this is the handler and this is the submit button. So whenever it's clicked, all the data would be sent to this page. This is how it looks. Now we already looked into the name attribute for the input. So each input field must have a name attribute to be submitted. If the name attribute is omitted, the value of input field will not be sent at all. Okay. So this example will not submit the value of first name field. Why? Because the name attribute is missing. So there are a couple of exercises. Please go through them. Try to solve them. Now this chapter describes the different attributes for HTML form element. So there are different attributes for the form element, this form element. First, very obvious one is action. So what is action attribute? Action attribute defines the action to be performed when the form is submitted. Usually form data is sent to a file on the server when the user clicks on the submit button. In the example below, the form data is sent to a file called actionpage.php. And the file contains a server-side script that handles the form data. Okay. If the action attribute is omitted, the action is sent to the current page. Then target attribute. The target attribute specifies where to display the response that is received after submitting the form. The target can have one of the following values: blank. The response is displayed in a new window or tab. Self, the response is displayed in the current window. Parent, the response is displayed in the parent frame. So in case of iframe, it will be displayed in the parent frame. Top, the response is displayed in the full body of the window. And the frame name, so it can be directed to a special iframe. So this way it can have a target. The method attribute will be much more clear to you once we study and create a couple of backend systems using Node and JavaScript. So the method attribute specifies the HTTP method to be used when submitting the form data. The form data can be sent as URL variables. So with method equals to get, for example, or to post a transaction using method equals post. The default HTTP method is get. Okay, when you don't specify any method, it's get. So let's read out the notes really quickly. Appends the form data to the URL. in the name value pairs. Never use get to send sensitive data because the submitted form is visible in the URL. The length of URL is limited to 2048 characters. Useful for form submission where users want to bookmark the result. Get is good for non-secure data like query strings in Google. Post appends the form data inside the body of the HTTP request. Okay, again, these will make much more sense once we learn the backend applications, and also we will be creating a couple of applications that from the front end where we will be sending data using the body. Post has no size limitations and it can be used to send large amounts of data. Form submissions with post cannot be bookmarked. The autocomplete attribute specifies whether the form should have autocomplete on or off. When autocomplete is on, the browser automatically complete values based on values that user has entered before. Okay. No validate attribute. So no validate is a Boolean attribute. So if you simply put it, that means it's true. So when it is present, it specifies that the form data should not be validated when submitted. So that's non-validate. Okay. Then there is an example. Please try to solve it. This will reinforce your knowledge. And yeah, these are a couple of... This is a summary of all the attributes of form. So except char set specify the character encodings used for form submission. Action specifies where to send the form data when form is submitted. Autocomplete specifies whether a form should have autocomplete on or off. Enc type specifies how the form data should be encoded when submitting it to the server, only for post. Method specifies the HTTP method to use when sending form data. Name specifies the name of the form. No validate specifies the form should not be validated when submitted. Rel specifies a relationship between a linked resource and the current document. And target specifies where to display the response that is received after submitting the form. Okay. Again, I'm just reading out so that, we can be engaged together and we can, I can help you speed through so that, you don't spend too much time on individual page and you can be engaged to the page. And yeah. So the HTML form attributes can contain one or more of the following form elements: input, label, select, text area, button, field set, legend, data list, output, option group. The most used is input. Okay, we have already seen this. Label, again, we have already seen. Select, okay, is another very commonly used element. So this is how select looks like. Okay, and you can see it's pretty simple. We have a select, and inside that we have lots of options. As simple as that. So go ahead and try to add a couple of more options here. Create another select, for hobbies. So that is the way to reinforce your knowledge. Option element defines an option that can be selected. By default, the first item in the drop-down list is selected. To define a pre-selected option, add selected attribute to the option. Okay. So if I want to pre-select one of these, so I can, I can use, for example, selected. So I want, for example, Audi to be selected. So select it, and if I run it, so Audi will be selected. The size attribute is used to specify the number of visible values. Okay, so if I do size 3 in the select, then only 3 options will be visible. To allow multiple selections in the select, element, use multiple. Text area is a little bit different from text input. So here is how it looks like. Okay, so this is text area. So we can define rows and columns, the default size. So rows and columns specifies the visible number of lines and width of the text area. Okay, this can also be done using CSS. Button is a clickable button and it has an on-click handler. See, it's all small. See, so what it does is here we have basically written a JavaScript expression. Field set and legend, it will be best explained using the demo. So this is a field set. This is the legend, or the describing the field set. It can obviously be styled. So basically, we are grouping things together, right? For example, it can be home address, office address. So they are related pieces of information, right? So they can be done using field set. Field set has a legend and a couple of inputs. Data list elements specifies a list of predefined options for an input element. Users will see a drop-down list of predefined options as they input data. The list attribute of input element must refer to the ID attribute of the data list. So here I have a data list. There I have options. Okay. And data list has an ID. And in the input we are saying the list is equal to browsers. Okay. Let's see what it does. So here, when I try to type something, so we see a list of predefined values. Okay, and also if it's clear, we can select different values. So this is a data list tied with an input using the list attribute. The output element represents the result of a calculation. Okay, so for example, let's try it. So here I'm writing, this is some value, this is some value, and here this is the output, right? So output is present here. So how is this achieved? So we have a form, okay, and basically we are on input, we are adding x dot value equals to %a dot value, %b dot value. This is input for A. This is input for B. This is output for X. Now this can be anything. Okay. Here they have given names A, B, and X. And basically this output is for A and B. And it's empty. Right? It's empty. So here in the form we have an on input event. So whenever any input changes, right, whether this or this, then what happens? The x dot value, the value of x becomes the sum of a dot value and b dot value. What is this %? So in JavaScript, you have seen already, or you will see that the input is usually received as a string. So this is 54 string, okay, which is not equal to 54 number. So this helps us, do mathematical calculations and parse it into number. There is an exercise, please complete them. And this is a nice list of everything. So input types. So here we have a long list of input types. So we have buttons, checkbox, color, date, time, local, email, file, hidden, image, month, number, password, radio, range, reset, search, submit, tell, text, time, URL, week. Okay, I'll quickly go through them so you don't have to go through the page again. Input type text, single line text input field, we know this. Input type password, so you will see here that it's, it behaves like a password. Input type submit, again it's a submit button. Input type reset defines a reset button that will reset all the values to their default values. Okay, so when I submit reset, if I change it and I press reset, so all of the values change into the default values. Okay, so this was the default value, it changed to that. Input type radio we have already seen. Input type checkbox we have already seen. So radio is basically, they are grouped together using the name attribute. Input type button is a simple button on click of which we can perform some JavaScript. Input type color, let me show you. So by default it gives you a nice color picker depending on the operating system and browser. Okay. Input type date, again by default it behaves like a date. So it has a pop-up thing. Again, it depends on the browser and the operating system that you're using. Date has, min, max, and all these sort of properties. So it has max, like it can accept maximum of this date. It can accept minimum of this date. Okay, so it has these some properties. Date time local specifies a date and time input field with no time zone. Depending on the browser support, a date picker can show up in the input field. Let's see how it looks. So here, it has this kind of a support, and also depending on browser, it gives us this kind of an color picker. Input type can be email. Okay, so test. So it wants us, right? It's not a valid email address. So this happens at the, we don't have to write any extra code for that. It does some basic validation. Now it can be of type image. Okay, so so input of type image defines an image as a submit button. Okay, so the part to the image can be applied to the source attribute. So whatever is in the source, that particular image becomes our submit button. Okay. Input type file. So it allows us to choose a file. Okay. So it defines a file select field and a browse button for file uploads. So at times we need input we need an input just for, sake of storing some data or keeping some data or updating some data that does not need to be displayed to the users. For them, we have input, type hidden. Again, these things are so simple, so common sense, right? So that's why I'm going through them really quickly. Then input type month, again, it's again so obvious, right? So input type month gives you this kind of a control, okay? So when I select it, it's July 2022. Again, the names are so common sense that, it's very obvious. So there can be restrictions in the name. Again, this is an important list. Please try these. Please see what happens if you use the disabled attribute. For checkboxes, please see what happens when you use the checked attribute. What happens when you use max in an input field, min in an input field, max length in an input field? Okay. What is the difference between max and max length? Interview question. So max specifies the maximum value, like it cannot be more than 5,000 or something like that. And max length counts the number of characters, limits or restricts the number of characters. Pattern, again, for some regular expression check. Read only, obvious, cannot be changed. Required, must be filled out. Size, specified the width in characters of an input field. Step, so the legal number of intervals for an input field. So if it's 1, then it can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 0.1, then it can be 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, that way. And value specifies the default value of input. Okay. Then there are a couple of examples. Please go through them. Okay. See min and max. Then go through so the type is tell, and there is a pattern here. See what happens. Just try these things out. Okay. So it shows that the format does not match. So there can be time, there can be URL, week. So do try these out. Make sure that you are aware of all of them. You don't need to remember all of them, but make sure that you are aware of all of them. Very important. I know it's a bit dry, okay, but I don't want to spend too much time, right? For example, what I can do is for each one of them, I can type these out for you. It will become very lengthy. I want to keep the HTML section as small as possible, but I want to make sure that you are aware of everything, but I want to keep it really short. Okay. I don't want to make it like a 15 video long thing. For CSS, it was important, so I did it. But here, I don't really think for these things it's important for me to type out everything for you and make this like 15-20 videos long. So yeah. So there are all these examples, so it's worth, please go through them, try them out. Placeholder attribute, again, we want to show these as a placeholder. So I'll just show you quickly. I'm sure most of you are aware of it. So this thing that you see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, this is placeholder. Okay. The required attribute, that means it's required. Step is something I think I should show you. So here, see, step is 3. So it's moving up 3. If I enter any number other than step of 3, for example, 22, which is not a multiple of 3, it shows an error, right? It can either be 21 or 24. So autofocus specifies that an input field should automatically get focused when the page loads. So all we need to do is we need to give the input the autofocus attribute. Height and width are obvious. List attribute, again, they are used to connect a data list to an input. So using this list, we are able to connect the browser's data list to the input. Autocomplete we have already seen. Please do this exercise. Then form attributes. We have seen most of these. So form action. Okay. So form action attribute specifies the URL of the file that will process the input when the form is submitted. This attribute overrides the action. This overrides the action attribute of the form. Okay. Form action attributes with the following input types: submit and image. So here you can see that with the submit, I have given a form action. This form action will override the action that is given to the form. So form action will override the action given to the form. So if in an interview you are shown this form and you are asked on click of the submit, which page will be used? So this is the one that will be used for submit. Form encoding type, again, so form enc type attribute specifies how the form data should be encoded when submitted with post. Okay. And this attribute overrides the enc type attribute of form element. So inside the submit, you can give, form enc type and whatever the type is. Form method, again, whether it's get or post, you can override it here. Form method in the submit. Form target, again, you can override it here. Same pattern. Form no validate, you can override the no validate from here. No validate is given to the form, and form no validate goes to the input submit. Nice. So we have covered 90% of things, okay, that we will be using and you will be using when you will be working with different applications. Okay. So let's wrap up today's lesson, today's class, and in the next class we will go through a little bit more things that might be useful to you.